you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to the Dapper Dinosaur channel. I've got Drew here from Drewing Conclusions, also in the chat. And I do want to say before we really get started, I am still conducting the Patreon drive. I'm trying to get to 400 per month, and we have 108 to go. So if you do have some spare change every month, or if you're looking for a 10% discount for doing an annual pledge, do consider it. If, of course, you can't afford it, then absolutely no hard feelings. But like I've said before, time is money, but also money is time, and if I can get there, then it'll be a much longer time before I have to consider scaling back on this channel to work on other endeavors, which I would rather not like to do, because I love doing this, and I hope that I can do it for as long as possible. Anyway, Drew, how are you today?
I am doing well. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you. You were recommended to me by someone who you know on Reddit, and
Yes,
so
I was.
yeah.
I believe Cuttlefish recommended.
Exactly. And he and I are in a Twitter chat together. I don't actually spend a whole lot of time on Reddit, I must confess.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I spend more time here on YouTube. I mean, look, this is where my audience is. They're not going to follow me all the way to Reddit. So I want to say hi to everybody in chat. And so, of course, this is Leaving Young Earth Creationism. So, Andrew, let's just dive into it. Unless you have anything you want to say about yourself before we get started.
No, I think that's good.
Okay, well then let's just dive into it. So Andrew, how old were you when you became a young Earth creationist? And if you were raised in that environment, you can just say that.
Yeah, I was raised in that environment. My dad is a pastor of a small non-denominational church, so obviously I was raised, deep into Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity. Um, and so yeah, I think for the first period of my life, young Earth creationism was just what I accepted as the way things were.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, was this something like, did you go to a public school, or did you go to like a school that was teaching Earth creationism, or what?
So I was homeschooled actually.
Mm.
Ranch in the Colorado mountains. It's a very beautiful place actually, and it was very remote. The nearest school was about 2 hours away, so I was homeschooled. As far as outside influences, during high school, I transitioned over to a private school,
Okay.
and I also went to summer camp a lot. And summer camp, there was a Christian summer camp nearby, and they had a group over from a creationist organization that would teach on creationism every summer. So that
Okay.
was a lot of my at least in the earlier period of growing up, that was my sources and my influences and inspirations for that sort of thing.
Okay. So as a kid, were you actually exposed to people who were actually not antagonistic to evolution teaching you about it? Or is that something that just
Um,
kind of got skipped over?
that got skipped over. So when I was about 6, I was a big dinosaur kid. I had 2 dinosaur books. I had the Dinosaur Encyclopedia. It was like a 2005 book that was as big as my Bible, and it
Yep.
had all sorts of great pictures of dinosaurs, and I loved it. And then the second book I had was Dwayne Gish's
Dinosaur by
Dinosaurs by
Design.
Design. Exactly.
Yes.
So Dinosaurs by Design was my least favorite of the two for a couple reasons. So first of all, the art was not as good.
Oh no, not at all.
Yeah, which is very important when you're 6 years old. And the second reason was the last third of the book was some kind of satire story with like full on political cartoon drawings of dinosaurs. It was a story about a dinosaur who evolved half winged, and then they weighed him down and he couldn't do anything and he died. So for me,
Amazing.
the last third of that book was worthless because the art was weird and the story was weird. But that book did have some cool stuff in it too. I remember it had a lot of stuff about dinosaurs in the modern era. Like there was a story about cowboys from Tombstone killing a
Oh yeah, a
killing a flying
pterodactyl or
dinosaur, a
something.
pterodactyl. Yes, there was stories of tetrapod dinosaurs in Zimbabwe. There was a story of there's like a full spread 2 pages picture of King George killing a dragon, except it wasn't a dragon, it was a dinosaur.
By the way,
Um,
George, not a king, just a Roman soldier.
right, right. Saint George, you're right.
Yeah.
That was me
Actually,
misremember.
I find that very few people actually know the story of or the location of the whole St. George story. I get a lot of people who are like, wasn't he from Russia or wasn't he from England? It's like, no, man, this whole story took place in Egypt.
Right.
Egypt. But yeah, people forget about that because, well, quite frankly, I'm not exactly convinced that the story is a literal thing that happened.
What would give you that idea?
Well,
Um,
I'll just say this: I don't think it's unusual to conclude that maybe there was a particularly aggressive, say, Nile monitor, which are very big lizards, that might have been harassing a town, and that some Roman soldier who happened to be a Christian went and killed it. That seems reasonable.
that does seem reasonable.
But
Um,
an actual dragon, like, that people are trying to sacrifice a maiden to, less convinced.
True. Yeah, I think in Twin Gish Dinosaur by Design, by far my 6-year-old favorite portion was the part that talked about Paracephalopus. Is that how you pronounce his name? I can't remember. I have not been
So
into
there's a
dinosaurs
few.
for a while.
There's Parasaurolophus or Parasaurolophus. You know what? No ancient Greeks or Romans are going to come and like whack you over the head for getting it wrong. So,
Okay. Well, Parasaurolophus was breathing fire using his head protrusion, and to me that was awesome. So, really, really, that was what kept Dinosaurs by Design in the running as one of my favorite dinosaur books. But back to the point of your question, which was about outside sources. I did have a lot of science books because that was what I was into, and my
yeah.
family would ink out with black Sharpie any portions that talked about millions of years, billions of years, evolution, the
Oh
Big Bang,
wow.
cosmology, anything like that, at least during my younger years, as sort of a protection measure because my mom figured she couldn't, monitor everything I was reading since I liked reading science stuff and she didn't really know much about science stuff. Uh, but that sort of backfired because very often in these books you would have a couple paragraphs of lead up explaining a bunch of concepts, and then there would be the conclusion. Because of this we believe this, this, or this. We
Mhm.
think that this dinosaur evolved into this, and then that would be the part that my parents would eke out. So I always had like this little bit of learning the premises without learning the conclusion, which was interesting, because you can sometimes draw those conclusions on your own. But other than that, other than those occasional snippets of books, I didn't necessarily have a influence from anything besides young Earth creationism growing up.
Okay. Well, so that's interesting. I don't think I've heard on the show before of someone's parents actually inking out, offending parts of science books. That's a first one for me. Was that like a thing that other people in the church were doing, or I don't know.
Um, no, I think it was pretty much unique. It was mainly just my parents would say, "Oh, this is not true. This is not true. We're just gonna ink it out so we don't have to deal with it." It was a way of cleansing the sources, making them more quote unquote reliable.
Okay. So, did you ever draw the conclusions that the books were trying to draw
Um,
without them actually stating it?
I would definitely say not really at first.
Okay.
There were things that I wondered about, but during that time, by the time I got to middle school, by the time I got through my 6-year-old dinosaur phase, um, something from Young Earth creationism really started to appeal to me, which was I was kind of a know-it-all, and when sometimes I would run into other kids in the neighborhood. By this point, we were living in town, and I would run into other kids in the neighborhood, and they would be like, "Oh yeah, this or this or this, something about the moon, something about the earth, something about the animals, something that I didn't think was true because of my own creationism upbringing." And I would love to be the know-it-all who would say, um, well, actually, if you look at the facts, the moon is moving away from us at the same rate your fingernails grow, which means the earth can only be so old. That was me because, by this time I had a little bit of internet access. And so I would, open up Answers in Genesis and I would look around, or I would, quote things that I learned in summer camp, or I would, flip through the tracks and little comic books they gave you, and I would memorize the facts. And so even though I kind of had seen some stuff that I wasn't sure about or I didn't know how to explain, or I had questions. I think that was overweighed more by the emotional fun that I was getting from being a know-it-all and from feeling smart and feeling intelligent because I knew all these things that the scientists didn't know.
Yeah. That's that is an aspect of it. There's this sort of like, oh, I have the secret knowledge that even the experts don't want you to know. Like, hey, this one cool trick that paleontologists don't want you to know will prove the Earth is only 6,000 years old.
Right.
Click
And
here now.
I had totally bought into that. By the end of middle school, by the start of high school, that was like I was the expert, on creationism. I had people who would, ask me about it, and I thought that I was all that because I knew all these facts, I knew all this stuff. And um I don't know, thinking back, some of it was not very well grounded. Well, a lot of it wasn't very well grounded, but some of it was just there were points where I would go through, my list of talking points, and I would think, I don't really have any actual arguments here. I just have, a collection of, you know, whatabouts, or avoiding the question, or but have you considered this? I didn't have any actual arguments or any actual systems. And I think as I started growing up and as I started getting deeper into science, that started becoming a little bit harder for me to hold on to.
Okay. So I have a question about the source of these. Like you said, there was a group that gave a creationist talk, and
Right.
you were obviously doing some kind of curriculum as part of homeschool. So were there any major organizations that were influencing you? Like you said, you read AIG. So was AIG one? What about like CMI or ICE? Well, okay, I should probably stop with just these acronyms, right? So Answers in
Right.
Genesis, Creation Ministries International, Institute for Creation Research, the Discovery Institute, um, or maybe somewhat more independent things like we get like Ken Ham out there, and I think Kurt Wise is an associate with one of the big ones. So were there any big names like that that were? Or, sorry, I said Ken Ham, but he's at AIG. I meant Kent
Right.
Hovind. Um,
Right.
so who were the big
Yeah.
names, if any?
So one of the big influences, I mentioned that I went to summer camp and that I learned about creationism there. And uh, at summer camp, there was a group called the Alpha Omega Institute. It's a small, just two people. It's like a mom and pop creationist ministry
Okay.
that would go around, and they had a mascot that was hilarious. It was a dinosaur, and they had a lot of very well put together slides, a lot of funny comics, a lot of things like that. That were great for as I was younger in elementary school, middle school, and I still remember a lot of the stuff that they taught to this day. Like I remember a comic that they had, it was a big on their slideshow, and it was like a ledge sticking out off a cliff, and there was dynamite under the ledge, and there was a very pious Bible believing Christian holding their Bible right on top of the dynamite. But then all the way out on the edge of the ledge was an evolutionist about to, press down the trigger and ignite the dynamite,
Oh
not
no.
realizing that that would drop them both, like the Bugs Bunny cartoon where they saw off the
Okay.
tree and they both fall, right? Um, and the point of the cartoon uh, was that evolutionists have a distant starlight problem too, because the age of the universe kept getting older in the textbooks. It would say,
Oh goodness.
12.9 billion, 13 billion, 13.5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to the Alpha and Omega Institute, this was a problem. And this was, oh, well, the evolutionists keep discovering more distant starlight and it keeps contradicting themselves. So they have to keep making the universe older. And, that was the kind of fare that I grew up on. And that was very influential to me.
Okay.
Um, besides the Alpha and Omega Institute, I did mention Answers in Genesis. Yeah, there were a bunch of books like the Answers book for kids, Answers books like that. Their website that I was, I learned about a lot from that. I read a lot on that. Um, and there was also Dr. Jason Lyle. Uh, I'm
Ah.
You may have heard of him. He's the guy behind the asynchronous thing. I can't remember the name of it, but
The asynchronous one-way speed of light.
exactly,
Or the
there we go.
asynchronous speed of light convention. Yeah,
Yeah, the
he
convention.
goes with but what if light travels infinitely fast towards the Earth, but at one half C away from the Earth? For no other reason than because it helps me solve the distant starlight problem.
Right. And, we could go into a lot of problems with that if we wanted. But I had a box set from Dr. Jason Lisle of a bunch of DVDs on the cosmos and on the solar system. And those were very influential in like the anti-Big Bang side of things as opposed to the anti-evolution side of things. I think those were the main influences on me growing up as far as creationism.
Okay. So, now did the other major organizations like Creation Ministries International or Institute for Creation Research, did you just not pay much attention? Did you not know about them?
Um, I think I just had everything I needed. I didn't really feel the need to find better explanations or to find more explanations.
Okay.
Answers in Genesis is very prolific. If there's a topic, you can probably find something on it. Not always, but very often.
Yeah, I believe they're currently, I think they're actually the largest and most well-funded young Earth creationist organization out there. I think worldwide.
Most certainly. Just this year, their end of year fundraiser gathered them a cool $17 million. So they are not.
My
doing
goodness.
poorly.
Hey, anyone who wants to give me $17 million, I'll spend it on better things than AIG will, I promise. It would be hard for me to break that promise, honestly.
I would like to extend my openness to that as well.
Yeah. Or, hey, you know what? You could send each of us, like $8.5 million.
I would be down for that too, really.
Yeah. I mean, granted, some of it will go to, like, some fancy booze for, my Tuesday show. But not all of it. Not all of it. Yeah, that's a crazy amount of money. Wow. I mean, I guess it makes sense that that's how they can do things like build a Tower of Babel, which apparently they're trying to do, or Babel. We'll go
Are
with
they
Babel.
doing that? Wow.
Yeah, so they're trying to make an expansion to the Ark encounter, which is going to be a Tower of Babel. And the great thing for me is that I don't see a way where they can win, because, okay, let's say God comes down and smites them and confuses their language, which, okay, great evidence for the truth of the Tower of Babel. But also, well, you just ruined your organization. You're done now. Or let's say God doesn't do that. Well, then that just raises questions about the truth of the story in the first place.
That's such a unique kamikaze way to prove creationism. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't mind it. I think it's really interesting.
It'll certainly be an interesting thing once we get, people to actually check it out and look at AIG's take on a post-flood but pre, like, classical Mesopotamian society,
Right.
that, because, everyone just assumes it's a Mesopotamian ziggurat, so, there's a very narrow window of time where they can realistically insert this Tower of Babel, and, it'll be interesting to take a look at it. Just like I think it's interesting to take a look at their weird takes on, antediluvian civilization, where they have a Colosseum with a giant fighting a Carnotaurus, which is just you know what? I don't think it happened, but that's a cool scene. I'll give you that. It looks cool.
If Dinosaurs by Design had included that, it would have become my favorite.
Nice.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying.
My
6-year-old me would have loved that.
Look, giant fighting Carnotaurus, it's a great scene for your D&D game, not so much for your science museum.
Yeah, and speaking of antediluvian and post-diluvian societies, I did have a book on that. I believe it was by ICR actually, so it wasn't from the AIG themselves. And that was a book that I enjoyed too. Probably wasn't the most factual thing looking back.
You don't
it had
say.
a lot of stuff. It had a lot of stuff on the Inca stones, for example.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you can provide a quick explanation of what those are.
So the Ica stones are a group of... Okay, so there's a few things. One is there are authentic stones from Ica, Peru, and they depict fairly ordinary scenes of the native life from pre-Columbian times, actually quite a while ago. So these are not any of the cultures the culture that made the Ica stones, the authentic ones, is not the current native population in the area. Nor, of course, is it the population descended from, Spanish conquistadors and whatnot.
Right.
So the authentic ones where we know where they came from, they actually have what's called provenance, which is how you trace back the chain of custody all the way to the archaeological site where the thing was found. Those ones, they depict fairly normal scenes. And stylized animals.
these are opposed to the ones that were found by a farmer in
Right.
a field and that, um,
Have
Kent
dinosaurs and
Kent Hovind's
aliens and
son has, bought and added to his
yeah.
collection, right?
So there's a whole host of them, thousands of them, for which there
Yes.
is no provenance, but they also tended to pick things like brain surgery and aliens and dinosaurs and other such unusual things.
Yeah.
But there's the twin problem. They don't have provenance, so even if they're authentic, we can't tell. So that they're useless in terms of science and archaeology and history, right? Because you need provenance for such things, and they don't
Right.
have them. The other problem is that when they depict dinosaurs, they don't depict them in a way that makes you think that, oh, this person definitely saw a living dinosaur of this type. They depict them in a way that you would get from, say, like a comic book in the 50s, which,
Right, you have your tail dragging
right.
iguanodons.
And interestingly enough, they started being found at around the time that comic books in the 50s depicting dinosaurs were popular. And the person who claims to have carved them also said that's where he got the depictions. So
Yeah.
there's that big problem there where it's just like everything is just lining up to say this was just a tourist trap. And this farmer lucked into finding a guy who was willing to buy these and put them in a big museum. By the way, guys, I have noticed there have been a few questions. We are holding questions until the end. There will be a approximately half-hour Q&A section. So I do see that you are asking the questions. I am, however, intentionally holding them until the end because that's just how we do leaving on Earth creationism. When we do get to that point, though, super chats will have priority, and if you super chat now, it will be saved. So if you do want to do that to make sure your question gets in right at the top, do feel free. But like I said, they won't be asked, or I won't be asking questions or answering until the very end. And if you didn't super chat, you'll probably have to resend it with a tag to @DapperDinosaur. There you go. Just a little bit of housekeeping there. So let's see. That was interesting. What did are there any interesting little bits about antediluvian culture that you remember? Were they saying that the Ica stones were
Oh, yeah.
antediluvian, or
Um, well, there was a little bit of a thing where they believed, in this particular book at least, it presented the argument that a lot of that antediluvian advanced technological culture
Mhm.
transferred over into the early post-flood world. For example, they pointed to a bird statue that was found in a tomb in Egypt. It
Oh,
was a noble's tomb
yep.
in Egypt, and this bird statue had approximately correct aerodynamics if you added a tail fin to it.
I like that bit. It's like if you change it, it flies perfectly. Well, I mean, yeah, that's how most things work. If you change it enough, it'll fly. Yeah, that's probably true. But yeah, I'm familiar with that. So it sounds like it's basically a whole bunch of pseudo-archaeology conspiracy theories that are just like
Pretty much. There
hammered
was stuff
into a
about
young Earth.
yeah, there was stuff about let's see, Jewish, well, rather Hebrew and dang it, I am losing the words out of my mouth. Um, Phoenician, that's the word I was looking for.
Hmm,
Hebrew and Phoenician coins found in burial grounds in Greenland and the Americas. There was a lot of stuff about, a culture directly after the flood. So, 4,000, 4,200 years ago that was very advanced, that circumnavigated the globe, that
of
had
course.
powered flight, that sort of thing.
Howard.
Um, yes, powered flight. That's what that bird statue
Oh, that's
connects
a good
back
point.
to.
Yeah, that is usually the claim that's made there. Goodness. Did they do the Akambaro figurines?
They probably did, though I do not remember what those were.
Okay. Yeah, that. So, Eric Hovind also has a thing that he talks about where he goes through all these supposed archaeological anomalies, and like every time
Right.
you look into it, you find this one similar thing. There's no way to verify that it was actually found in the context that it was said, or the interpretation that he's giving it is not the most obvious interpretation. So, like, guys, this is a bad argument. Then again, there are no good arguments for young Earth creationism, so I
Right.
guess I can't complain too much. Um, okay, so at this point, you said you transferred to a private school for high school.
Yes. So at this point, my family moved into town, so I started to have more influences from more other areas.
Mhm,
Besides, just what I could see, in my by myself, what I could find by myself, living in a rural area, or what I could see at church. Um, During high school, uh, this was when I started really kicking, I guess, my interest in science into high gear.
Okay.
At this point, I was considering an engineering major. I eventually changed that to biology. Um,
Dangerous for a young Earth creationist.
it is dangerous, and that is something that my parents had a problem with. I'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, my first couple years of high school, I was starting to get dissatisfied with my list of gotcha questions and facts that I was using as my essentially my basis for my belief in creationism. Um, and at this point, I was also becoming more scientifically literate. The curriculum that I used during middle school for science wasn't young Earth creationist. It was actually a curriculum from the 1920s and 30s that was creationist. It was Christian friendly. It was creationist friendly, and mentioned catastrophism, a giant flood, as part of a potential explanation for geology. And,
Hmm.
it had a line, "We're still searching the rocks for explanations." So that was kind of my
Technically
background for
correct.
geology.
We are
Technically
still.
correct. That is true.
It's just
Um,
we've ruled a few of the potential explanations out, and spoilers. One of them is a giant global flood. That
right.
not an option.
But yeah, the books honestly were not that bad. These science curriculum books, even if they were very old, as I mentioned, they were from the 1930s and they'd been reprinted. Um, but they weren't that bad, and they gave me a pretty solid foundation on things like ecology, anatomy, that sort of thing that came into play later. And so as I was moving into high school, and I was starting to try to find more substantial arguments, more substantial basis for young Earth creationism. This was the period where I started getting into young Earth creationism fully. I got Michael Behe's Darwin's Black Box, and I read that a
Hmm.
couple times. I had Creation Basics and Beyond
I
by
spoke to Michael
ICR.
Behe not that long ago.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I was on there was some channel that was something or other Catholic, and yeah, he had an open mic interview with Michael Behe. So I stopped in and asked him a few questions.
I actually saw that. I didn't see your questions though.
Oh
If
well,
if if that was the one that happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
that sounds about right. I mean, I was
Yeah.
on
Okay.
I was on the actual stream. I was in like on the mic. So
Wow. Okay.
um,
Well,
but yeah.
good for
Anyway,
you.
sorry. Yeah, I also read Darwin's Black Box, although I read it after I had stopped being an Earth creationist. And I found it to be not very convincing. But how did you find it?
Um, a mix. So at that same time, I think was the first time I started being exposed, I guess is the word, to more conventional science literature. Partly because I enjoyed science. So, you Google something you want to learn about, and you're going to be taken to Wikipedia, you're going to be taken to Encyclopedia Britannica, things like that, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so at this point, I hadn't really realized that there was a divide between the actual science and creationism. At this point, I had totally bought into Ken Ham's belief that there are two interpretations looking at the same evidence, right? So that was the way I looked at it, and that was kind of whenever I heard something where oh, we haven't figured this out, we haven't discovered this yet, we don't know this yet. I would think, aha, the we're still searching the rocks for explanations would make
Right.
me go, aha, I know the explanation. And that was kind of how I was going into high school. My school, since I was going to a private school now, had a different curriculum that was a science-based curriculum called Apologia Science. Um, and so they were making high school pretty competent high school science textbooks that had a creationist bent. And most of the way they became creationist was they would have a whole chapter on science, and then they would tack a sentence on the end that referenced, the God of the Bible or the Creator God.
Hmm.
And so that was how they made this a creationist textbook. And then the other way was they would have small snippets about, how global warming is false or how the global flood is true, that sort of thing. Um, but part of what this science curriculum did that kind of undermined itself is it didn't take a top down approach to teaching creationism.
Right.
So Oops. Yeah, so a lot of the beliefs of the more academic creationists, the people at ICR or AIG, didn't filter down into the science textbook. So it would teach conventional things about, say, plate tectonics or conventional things about reproduction. And even though it would tack on at the end its sentences about how all of this was caused by the creator, I think it was important because it gave like an actual scientific basis that you could build to secular conclusions from, as opposed to trying to, fully be a creationist textbook that built to creationist.
Okay. So, is high school when you started first having your real, like, hey, maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. Maybe the other side is right or even exists?
Yeah, so I think a big turning point for me was in the middle of high school. I started doing dual credit classes at the local community college, and I had a biology class, and um, that class was amazing for me. I did all the extra credit assignments. I got 101 as my final grade.
Oh,
It was my favorite class of all of high school, and after that, I went up. I signed for biology 200 right after because I wanted to learn more. Um, and in biology 100, there was one assignment in the entire year that touched on evolution. It was mostly just basic biomechanisms, basics of genetics, that sort of thing. A basic biology class. But there was one assignment that touched on evolution, and I thought, oh hey, I don't believe in evolution. So instead of doing this, page and a half quiz, I'm going to write a 5-page double-spaced paper and turn that in instead, explaining uh, why evolution is a bunch of bogus. And so that was what I did. I spent a couple days compiling my best arguments and my best questions into a document, and then I turned that in instead of a quiz. And you know, I was very proud of myself and very nervous after I did that. And next class, my professor brought that paper back to me, and it was marked from top to bottom with red pen. And he
yikes.
said, "See me after class. Let's have a conversation." Um, so after class, we had a 2-hour conversation about creation versus evolution. He was a Mormon, so he wasn't.
Okay.
He was religious. He believed in creation and etc. But he also believed in evolution, and that was something I didn't realize was possible. So that was eye opening for me, and the conversation itself was eye opening for me too, because uh, this great paper that I had written, that was my manifesto, that had explained why I knew it and my professor didn't. Well,
Why
literally
I'm
every
smarter than
argument.
you, professor.
That was what my paper was, and it was really a big piece of humble pie that I had to eat, because
Hmm?
through those red pen markings and that 2-hour conversation, and then another conversation we had a little bit later, I really had to come to terms with a lot of stuff that I got wrong. Um, a lot of my arguments uh, were my personal arguments that I come up with myself, as opposed to saying stuff that other young creationists had said. Which I think is what made it so impactful for me. If I had just been repeating other people's words, I could have gone and found more words to repeat, and it wouldn't have affected me as much. But since this was my best arguments coming from the logic and the understanding that I had of these subjects, it really pointed out to me that I didn't have much understanding of these subjects.
Right.
Um, because from top to bottom, everything that I brought up, I believe I had an argument about how if wolves turned into dogs, how come there are still wolves?
Ooh, that's
Um,
rough.
yes, it is
Not
rough.
even monkeys, huh? Wolves.
Wolves. I went with wolves. Which at that time I did not realize there was a lot of archaeological and genetic and evolutionary evidence that had happened. Right? It's not a good hill to die on.
Yeah, no, not even most young Earth creationists will die on that hill. Although
Right.
I have encountered one person who was agnostic to the age of the Earth and who wasn't a Christian creationist, but who was a creationist nonetheless, who did argue that every dog breed was a separate divine creation, and that you couldn't just breed
Interesting.
chihuahuas from other dogs. They had to be a special creation. I was like, that's a take I've never heard before. That's
I
pretty
have not heard
extreme.
that either.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Let's see. Another of my arguments was I found some pop sci article on, I don't know, livescience.net or something,
Right.
um, that said new discovery pushes emergence of grass back 10 million years. And I said, aha, here is
Yeah.
grass 10 million years older than it's supposed to be. And this was the sticking point for me because my professor said, well, then we just change our science, right? We adapt our science. We learn. This is a new discovery, so we need to change our understanding with what we learn. And I had not thought of that as a possibility before. Maybe I wasn't the brightest kid, but to me, if you had your worldview, you had your idea of what happened, and you couldn't change from it. You couldn't shift it. And so seeing that when you learned something new, you altered your beliefs, that was a point for me. So yeah, after that class, those two biology classes that I enjoyed so much, I ended up deciding I wasn't going to go for engineering. I was going to go for biology instead when I got to college.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was a very formative class for me.
Okay, so and that was your second semester of the dual credit college biology, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes.
Okay, so at this point, let's say you're done with your second semester of bio as that dual credit. Um, were you a young Earth creationist coming out of that class?
I was. That was a point where I realized I had to like get better at it, I guess. I had to have better answers.
Okay.
But I hadn't gotten to the point where I thought there weren't any answers. I thought there weren't any way to explain it. I remember, after that, my family was very proud of me for, sticking up to the brainwashing school.
Yep.
uh there were people in the church who like offered to have him over for dinner so I could continue the conversation and they could watch and listen, um which would have appealed to my ego and to my know-it-all nature, except that I knew that I'd kind of gotten torn apart and I didn't have any arguments left.
Right.
um so this was a point where I thought, okay, I don't understand everything in Darwin's black box, so I'm just going to assume that's a bunch of true, cool biology, genetics stuff that's just, a little bit too deep for me to understand so far. But I'll just assume that, when you get to that level, we have it all figured out. What I have to do is figure out some of the basics and find some basic flaws in evolution and some basic truths for creation. And so that was the point after that class where I really started trying to look at both sides and trying to actually educate myself on the subject
Mhm.
and learn something about the matter. So yeah, after that, I before I came on here, I tried to go back through some of my journals, some of my old text messages to try and piece together exactly how this process happened. Um, and it really wasn't just creationism that was happening. So a little bit about the non-denominational church I grew up in. I call it non-denominational, but it's sort of a pseudo denomination called Calvary Chapel. So it started in the 60s and 70s. These were the original Jesus freaks in Southern
Okay.
California, um, and it grew out of the Baptists, but it had a very big emphasis on the Holy Spirit, on prophecy, on the gifts of the Spirit, on miracles, on that sort of thing. Uh, you know, so much that went, it strayed away from baptism, became its own sort of thing. Um, so that was kind of what I was coming out of. And one of the things that I started questioning in that was specifically its emphasis on prophecy. Um, there was a period where I was going through the book of Daniel and I was looking at, all of these supposedly fulfilled prophecies. And this was another area where maybe you know, the the creationist or the Christian views not filtering all the way down, not filtering top down into the curriculum or into the curriculum that I was
Mhm.
learning in high school. Another area where that maybe shot itself in the foot, because a lot of my curriculum was teaching a very solid understanding of history, at least for, at least the last 2,500 years, right?
Right.
Maybe not as much Egypt and the Exodus and that sort of thing, but it was teaching a very solid version of history, definitely from the classical times. So when you look at this book of Daniel and it has prophecies that people in Calvary Chapel connected to being like the Seleucid Empire or Ptolemaic Egypt or the Etruscans or early Rome, right? And I had, at least a passable understanding of these cultures and topics from, my history books. I was starting to see that things didn't match up exactly. And it was sort of a place where I didn't think that any of the explanations for these prophecies in Daniel were right. But I also realized that I did not have the scholarship or the time or the understanding to make up my own interpretation of the entire book of Daniel.
Yeah,
So
that would be a pretty tough
it,
thing to do.
it's
Tall
yeah,
order.
it is. I'm not going to say that I couldn't do it if you gave me a lot of money and a lot of time, but I couldn't do it if you gave me a lot of money and a lot of time. Um,
Not even
so
$15 million? Or 17 million? Sorry.
$17 million, man.
I
I
bet
would
you,
try. I would really,
yeah,
really
I
try.
bet you produce something after $17 million.
I would produce something. That is true.
Would it be any
Yeah.
good? Who knows?
Well, if you give me $17 million, you will find out.
There you go, everybody. Send 17 million to Drewing Conclusions on Reddit. I don't know how you do that. I don't think Reddit has money
That's a really
transfer.
bad idea, but yeah. Um, so so I was at a period where I didn't really know where to stand on some of these prophecies, and I think that set the stage where I was able to look at, Genesis and realize maybe I didn't know where to stand there too.
Okay. So, was there anything in particular that was like, this is the thing. This is how I know that young Earth creationism, or was it sort of a slow journey out, and then eventually you realized, hey, I guess I'm not a young Earth creationist anymore?
Well, I think some of the first things I did was because like I said, up until that point, up until I was starting to question, what exactly the book of Daniel meant or what exactly these prophecies were referring to. Um, and that kind of opened the door for me to start questioning what exactly the book of Genesis meant. And reading something critical of with like a critical eye or questioning eye as opposed to reading it coming from a place of believing in everything it's a really different process and experience. So, you would read through the flood story and you would think, well, hold on a second. This is a logistical nightmare, right? Like, can you imagine building an ark for 100 years and having to deal with wood rot and having to deal with insects like termites and having to deal with, you know, all of the problems that are coming along with it, especially since, how are you going to experiment on a zoo, right? Like, this takes experimentation, this takes knowledge. I don't think that anybody had the knowledge on how to run a zoo like that,
Actually,
you
one of
know,
my
before the
favorite things
flood.
is this past year for International Zookeepers Day,
Right.
the Ark Experience thanked their 20-something zookeepers who are keeping
Right.
like a few hundred animals. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, hold on, but your entire Ark park here is proposing that 8 people kept something like 30,000 animals alive for a year. You can't keep a few hundred alive with a staff of like 8 for at all. That's why you have a staff of
Right.
over 20. So what gives?
And this is what I was looking at. Like, I was looking at the Cincinnati Zoo specifically, and it had 200 employees plus, another 400 seasonal employees. And then it had something like 220 million gallons of water every year.
It's
Um,
ridiculous how much water animals need.
right. And I was looking at their cost of food and their statistics on food and labor. And I was thinking, this is for 6,000 animals.
Yeah,
And
tiny
so
compared to the Ark.
right, and so I was trying to do, like, some basic math. Like, I realized that that much water would scuttle the ark something like 27 times.
Yeah,
Um, and so I was trying to figure out a way to, um
Noah had a very advanced desalination plant right there.
right, and, I was trying to figure out a way to compare this, and I was thinking about, all of the logistical difficulties that would come with building an ark like that and then sitting on that ark for over a year, right? Because they got on the ark, like, 7 days before the rain started, which is something you don't really realize
Hmm.
until you try to read it critically. And I was thinking about things like, germs and disease outbreaks and, how they would keep some of these things in check. I was also thinking about
Oh, but not only do they have to keep them in check, though, they have to keep them alive through the flood because we
right.
still have the diseases. So somebody's got to have syphilis on that Ark.
Somebody's gotta have syphilis, somebody has to have, tapeworms, somebody has to have,
Mm-hmm.
hair worms. You have to have all of these parasites and diseases kept alive for the post-flood world. And there was also a problem, right? Because most of these animals, there's only two. And this is going to cause the biggest food pyramid problem in
Oh
existence,
yeah.
right?
Oh
So,
no, the
so
tiger ate the gazelle. I guess we have no more gazelles now.
well, exactly. So we've got our mouse, and a snake eats the mouse, so no more mice, and then a bird eats the snake, so no more snakes, and we get uh snake gets gored on one of those what are those? I'm losing my train of thought, but we have this chain where there's simply not enough food for to go around for the predators, right? Where
Yeah,
they're going to all go extinct because either they don't have enough to eat or they eat other species out of existence.
right.
And on top of that, right, we have to have to avoid that, we have to have these species reproducing at massive rates right away off the ark, which does not work if there are juveniles going onto the ark. So you have to like Noah and his family had to have gotten these animals at the perfect time. They had to be like the perfect age, and then they had to have perfect nutrition for a year, so that right when they got off the ark, they could be reproductive powerhouses to repopulate the earth. It just doesn't make sense. And
And there are organisms that just can't do that. Like, good luck
right,
getting your elephants to reproduce more than once every couple of years, because
yeah.
they physically can't. It takes a long time to gestate and rear a baby elephant.
Well, the flip side of that too, right? Like, one litter of rats gets let free on your ark, and in an enclosed space with limited food. Um, that's disaster, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Plus, the period of time on the ark is close to the rat lifespan anyway. Even if you take juveniles on, they're going to be dying of old age by the time they get off.
that's true. Um, so so that sort of thing, I think I was trying to figure out how does this work, because I couldn't figure out how it it could possibly work from a logistical perspective. Um, but at that point, I think my first time where I actually went to a secular source to see what evolutionist arguments against creationism was a Simon Dan video. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
I am.
Okay. Um, because I liked his flat Earth videos. I thought they were hilarious.
Right.
But I also, I would scroll through his feed and I would see videos on creationism, and I would think, well, we're not in the same camp as flat earthers.
Hmm.
And I would just scroll past and I wouldn't want to click on it. Part of it was because I felt like I didn't want to see what it would say.
Right.
And I think one of the first ones I did finally click on him responding to Kent Hovind on something.
Okay.
And this was my first experience with Kent Hovind, and it led me down a Kent Hovind rabbit hole on YouTube,
Oh, goodness.
as YouTube tends to do.
Yeah.
And I believe that ended with me watching a debate between Kent Hovind and Professor Dave.
Oh, yeah, that one
Uh,
was... That was one of the more snarky debates.
it was a very heated debate, I'll say that.
Yes.
Um, but it brought up so what that debate did was it brought up things that I hadn't heard about, like ERVs or housekeeping genes, that were on the same academic level as Michael Behe's writing. So all of a sudden, I couldn't hold on to, oh well, at the super academic, at the super smart level, Michael Behe has it all figured out, right? Um,
Or does he?
well, now all of a sudden, I realized I couldn't just hold on to that because there were evolutionists making arguments on that level. So now all of a sudden, I had to like go for myself and parse between myself, which was something that I didn't want to do. Because if I could hold on to the idea that Michael Behe was unrefuted and nobody could explain this, then I could work my way up to that pinnacle by doing my arguments until I was at that level, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But now all of a sudden I realized that wasn't a goal I could really shoot for, because you know there were people making arguments on that same level outside of Behe, right? So for me, that was kind of like, okay, well, not even the people at the top are uncontested, and the people below me on the academic chain of creationism are also not uncontested. So where do I fit? Where do I go in the middle? I was starting to realize I had to pave my own way towards a creationist argument, because I wasn't finding anything that was like so conclusive or so perfect that I could just listen to it.
You're gonna make your
And
own creationism with blackjack and hookers.
that was the plan. That was totally the plan. But the problem is, when you do the science yourself and when you
Yep.
learn it yourself, it doesn't lead towards creationism. It didn't lead me towards creationism. It was leading me away from it, which I didn't like. I definitely did not like that as I was nearing the.
Okay. So, at what point can you safely say that you had left creationism behind? Was it at the end of high school? Sometime after?
So I did sort of a weird thing after high school where I did a gap year where I went to 2 consecutive Bible colleges because they gave me scholarships. So
Okay.
that was my post high school experience for a year afterwards. Um and each of these Christian colleges, these Bible colleges, which were essentially made to train up pastors, which I did not want to be a pastor, but I also was too scared to go to college. So
Okay.
this was my in between place. This was my gap year. So I remember, each of these colleges had their statement of faith, and you had to sign it saying, all of this stuff about prophecy, all of this stuff about Christianity, and all of this stuff about creation. And I remember on the prophecy stuff and on the creation stuff, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I really believed it, but I checked it off anyway because I figured I'm going to go to Bible college. They'll have the answers. I'll figure it out there.
Right.
I did not figure it out there. Yeah.
That doesn't super
So
surprise me.
yeah, so my first semester of Bible college, I took a class on Genesis and I took a class on Daniel, the book of Daniel, because those were like my two sticking points as far as the stuff that I was unsure of, the stuff that I couldn't explain, the stuff that I was, starting to lean away from.
Right.
And both of these were taught by pastors, which was helpful for the Daniel class, but it wasn't helpful for the Genesis class because the pastor didn't have a lot of the answers I was looking for. And so at this point, I had enough of a foundation in actual science, in how the world works, that I could kind of go through a article on answers in Genesis, and I could have enough discernment to pick apart some of the things that were poor arguments and some of the things that I thought were wrong. Um, and so I remember I would ask him, like, I would go up after class and I would say, "So, um, I was reading this article on Answers in Genesis about the Coconino sandstone,
Mm.
and it says this and this and this, but I'm not sure about that. And there's this counterpoint, right? And this was definitely a period of a lot of Wikipedia diving, where I would try to verify these claims for myself with whatever online resources I could, and I wasn't finding any satisfactory answers, right? Because like with the Coconino sandstone example, this was one Aeolian sandstone, which is a sandstone that is laid down under air,
Mhm.
usually by wind. But this was one Aeolian sandstone out of thousands of these strata and rock formations across the world.
And
And
it's not
even
very
if you
close to
could
the top. It's below everyone's flood boundary.
Right, and if you could prove that this, Coconino sandstone wasn't, let down or laid down under, laid down subaerially, even if you could prove that, well, what about all the other, sandstones, right? It's just one layer, and part of the problem was, like, they would say, well, subaerial sandstones have these characteristics, the Coconino sandstone doesn't have these characteristics, therefore, Coconino sandstone was put down by water. But that begs the question: what about all the sandstone layers that do have those Coconino or those characteristics that the
Right.
Coconino lacks?
Never mind that the coconino does have those.
Right, it does. It actually does. I don't know how deep we want to get into it, but there's been a
Oh,
lot of talk about the angle of the dunes in the
oh
Coconino
yeah.
sandstone.
That's an Andrew Snelling classic.
It is an Andrew Snelling classic, and
I have a series on Andrew Snelling called "The Most Dishonest Creationist" because
I have
he
seen
just
that
flat out
series.
lies.
Yes, I have been exposed to some of his lies. I'll
Yeah.
just say that.
And the thing is, it's one of those things where, like, look, this is my favorite example. I didn't go into it because it didn't come up much in that series, but in a paper arguing that folded sediments had to be soft when they were folded because if they were hard, they would have had cracks. He took
Right.
pictures of some sedimentary folds, but in these, there are oddly enough people in frame, and it's
And they're
because
covering the cracks,
yeah, it's
as they would
because yeah, if
say.
they weren't in frame, there would be obvious cracks that he's saying don't
And
exist.
can you imagine being one of his students in that photo, where Andrew Snelling sets you down in front of a massive crack in the rock and says, "Stay here, stay still. I need to take a picture."
What at that point I would just be confused. But if it were me and then I read that paper, I would be livid.
Right. I would be too. And that was starting to be, the pattern as I was going through this stuff, not just with that sandstone, but with a lot of things where I would read the answers in Genesis or interpretation, and then I would do some fact checking myself, and then it wouldn't add up, and I would be, frustrated, and I would try to figure out a way to add it up myself. Um, and so as I would go, deeper and deeper into the annals of various creationist web pages, um, things just kept getting harder for me. Like I wasn't finding more answers. I was finding more questions. And
Mhm.
I was also finding more hand waving. So at the same time as I am studying, young earth creationism directly, I'm also studying science. And you would well, you would not be surprised, but I was surprised at
Right.
how many things just didn't get mentioned. Right? Like, this was the period where I found out there were Precambrian rocks. Like,
Right.
until this
With
point,
fossils.
my understanding of the Cambrian explosion was what was shown to me in, my Young Earth Creationist books, which was a two-page centerfold with thousands of modern animals all exploding across the page. That was what I thought the Cambrian explosion was. I thought all of these brand new taxa were just, modern animals, you know. And
Right.
so and they didn't even mention
All the modern body plans appear suddenly in the Cambrian. It's like, yeah, but
exactly.
body plan is a pretty general thing. We're not finding modern like spiders and ants and fish in the Cambrian. Sorry,
Right, and there was
buddy.
like on that picture, there was like a border collie. That's what I thought the Cambrian explosion was. So 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 all of a sudden I was learning, that's not what the Cambrian explosion was. Not only that, I was learning that there were rocks before the Cambrian explosion and there were fossils before. I have creationist books right here. Like this book is called The Fossil Record, and it has about 2 paragraphs on Precambrian rocks, and it doesn't mention the fossils at all. Um, and so that
I'm
was the
not very
level of
surprised.
I just knocked all my stuff over.
Uh-oh.
That was the level of information that I had on some of these things, and I
Right.
kept running into that. Right, like there are so many phenomena across the sciences that creationists just haven't even um, bothered to talk about or explain or elaborate or work into their theory. And part of the reason for that is that young Earth creationists refuse to acknowledge or accept anything unless they can work it into their. So um, so many things that I would not have learned about if I had stuck to Earth creationism. I learned about a little bit later, and then since I was building my own version of young Earth creationism with blackjack and hookers, uh, this was like forbidden knowledge. You can't forget it. The hooks of Cthulhu had wormed their way into my mind, and there was no way I could
Uh-oh.
get rid of this, right? So I had to, somehow make my own version of creationism that explained these things that creationism or creationists were apparently loath to acknowledge even existed.
Yeah. Yeah, actually one of my favorite things that creationists just don't address in any usually at all, and certainly not in any detail, is biogeography. Because they'll just be like,
Right.
oh, like there were land bridges and
Oh man.
some vegetative mats, and it's like, oh, okay, but that doesn't come even close to explaining the actual patterns, guys.
This was another early question I had, which was, what was the pre-flood ecology like? Because I had, I mentioned my middle school textbooks were pretty solid as far as like ecology went. So I
Mhm.
understood some of these concepts of niches and predation and the food pyramid and primary and secondary consumers and producers, that sort of thing, right? And none of this makes sense if you see, all of the animals in the fossil record were alive at the same time, right? Like there are only so many niches to fill, and you have so many animals competing for them. It just doesn't make sense, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't match with the competitive exclusion principle where you can't have two animals in the exact same niche. And I was
Yeah.
finding, for example, our index fossils, you know, they're not dinosaurs and birds and that kind of thing. No, our index fossils are a lot of, brachiopods and bivalve clams and that sort of thing,
Hmm.
right? And they're all saltwater, shallow marine filter feeders. They all hold the same niche, and yet they're so divided from each other in the fossil record that they never overlap. And you can use them to predict the age of or the position of a rock in a geologic record, right?
Right.
Which makes no sense if you try to build any sort of paleobiome for the pre-flood world.
Yeah, that's
And
the paleoecology of the pre-flood world is bonkers no matter how you look at it.
right. And it's not just the number of species and the undue diversity, too much diversity. It's also the biomass, right?
Oh yeah. Just the chalk beds
Yeah,
would be too much biomass for the whole planet to support.
right. And it's not just chalk beds. There's chalk, there's chert, there's coal. There is so much, biologic matter, limestone.
The
There's so
pre
much biologic matter
the
in these
pre-flood
rocks
world
below
is just
us.
2 miles thick of solid living organisms.
Well, that's literally what it was, right? Like, um, there was one paper that I found early on, while I was at Bible college, that uh, it was all of these. I don't remember the exact name of them. They were proto squids, essentially. They were a type of crustacean
Wait, crustacean or mollusk?
mollusk.
Okay. I was gonna say, if there
I
were
get
crustacean proto-squids, I want to know
Yes.
about that because that's a
I am
problem for
sorry. I
evolution.
am getting my scientific names mixed
That's
up.
okay. Everyone does it.
Yes. I don't remember the specific name of what they were. I wish I could find that paper. I don't want to take up too much time trying to
Don't worry
remember,
about it.
but it was specifically a rock formation in Arizona that has a high density of these animals in it, and creationists estimated that there were 4 billion of these mollusk-like animals in this one rock formation alone. And so I was thinking that's a lot. So I I
Yeah.
I so I googled how big was the ocean during Pangea, right? And during the supercontinent, and there is a name for that ocean that I do not remember
I
because
believe
my
it's the
memory is failing.
Panthalassic Ocean.
Anthalassic Ocean. You're right. I remember the last part because that's that means ocean, but um yes. So I found the area of that ocean and then I divided it by 4 billion or whatever. Um, and it came out to something like 73 of these things per acre of water. Um,
Yeah, that's a lot.
it is a lot. It's a lot. And this wasn't the only thing. There was a dinosaur graveyard that I came across. Well, it wasn't a dinosaur graveyard. It was a reptile graveyard. Um, that had about an estimated 8 billion of these reptiles
Oof,
in it.
that's a lot.
Yeah, these fox-sized reptiles. And so this was supposed to be like in an area the size of Africa was their, theoretical range. And so I was doing the same, math division there. And it was crawling with that. Can you imagine going out onto your front lawn and there's like 8 reptiles just scurrying around?
Well, I can, but I live in a reptile-heavy area,
Well,
so.
there you go. You do live in a reptile heavy heavy area.
But yeah,
Um,
like you get these numbers, and you have to realize that that's just one species or
it's just
one
one
small group.
species.
Like you have to do it with all the other ones. So you just walk outside, and there would just be a carpet of animals.
Right. There was one other paper that I came across during this period that had to do with the biomass of the pre-flood world, and it was about coal. Um, and the way coal forms is peat and organic material is compacted, uh, you know, and lithified into coal. Right.
Hmm.
It's a process, and most of the coal we find, like through experiments, we can estimate that it's about 30 pounds of peat for 1 pound of coal. So it's a 30 to 1 ratio when this peat is compacted and eventually lithified into coal. Um, so the problem is if you estimate the amount of coal in the world and then you multiply that by 30, you've got, a swamp layer that is 20 feet thick covering the entire globe.
Oh, so Earth is just Dagobah before the flood.
There we go, which is Not realistic. So what
No,
these
it's not.
what that's understatement of the century, isn't it?
Yes,
Um,
it is. And it's early in the century too.
it is early in the century. We're making history. Um,
Heard it here
so
first,
what
folks.
this so what this paper did was it uh, took this took these estimates of how much coal you can pack to get, or how much peat you can pack to get coal, and they did their own experiment where they found that if the conditions are ideal, you can get a 10-to-1 ratio, where it's 10
Ooh,
pounds of peat for every pound of coal.
okay.
What they did was they used that and they estimated, okay, you can get this down to a 2-foot layer of swamps covering the entire globe.
That's
Um,
still not gonna work.
and, well, you would be surprised because they explained that this is very realistic, given that the pre-flood world was entirely rainforest with small
Oh,
oceans.
oh, I see. Well, that's convenient. Now, where
It
did all
is
those desert
convenient.
animals live?
Right. Well, it was 90% rainforest, 10% something else, and then that was the land mass.
Oh my
Um.
goodness. Now, I've also heard creationists talk about the high elevation inland seas. Where were those?
Oh,
Because that's been an explanation as to how
don't,
you
don't
had
get me
like.
started on ecological
Oh
zonation
my god. Okay,
because
we won't.
that was right now. I'm just bashing a lot of creationist theories, which I feel is moving a little bit away from the point of this
These are fairly laid
conversation.
back, so I'm not too upset about it.
Right. Ecological zonation was a big sticking point for me because it makes no damn sense.
You are correct. It doesn't.
it just fails to explain so much,
Yeah.
and it frustrates me, right? Because this is like the most basic aspect of the geologic column and the fossil record,
Hmm.
and there is this this very I'm trying to think of a good adjective, but I can't think of one that is fitting to this to the to how enormous this blunder is. It's so low effort.
Astronomical
Yes,
error.
it's so astronomically low effort compared to how fundamental a concept the geologic column and the fossil record is. Um, it is frustrating, right?
Yeah, no, it really is. It's one of those things where like you don't have to be an expert in any of this to realize that this explanation just doesn't work. Like it's total nonsense.
Right. So where it started for me was immediately with when I learned about Precambrian rocks and Precambrian fossils, which are stromatolites and algal mats, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
right? Um, so so which zone exactly are these Precambrian rocks, right? Because
Right.
these rocks had to come had to come in somewhere. But zone one in this geological zonation theory is shallow marine. So
Yeah.
what exactly is happening, right?
Where are all the lobsters and the trilobites and the flounders and whatnot?
Exactly. And I will tell you, this is an area that is shied away so much from by young creationists. They just don't mention it. Um, the only person that I could find who did mention it was somebody on a forum who said that there was a zone 0, which was deep ocean.
Okay, well then how
And
do photosynthetic bacterial bats work in the deep ocean, buddy?
which is what I wanted to say.
It's like
um,
that's great, but still doesn't really solve your problem.
Especially since stromatolites are anchored to shores, right?
Right.
So this was a major problem for me, right? Because we have the first entire chunk of the fossil record with no explanation by ecological zonation.
Yeah.
But then the next problem is, there are no exceptions. So you're telling me that every spider ran, faster than all of the
Faster
right?
than all the scorpions who came first.
Faster than all the scorpions, faster than all the trilobites, faster than everything else. In fact, every insect ran faster than, all of these proto insects, right? And it's the same with mammals, right? You will
My
you'll never
favorite is
find
pterosaurs.
right, pterosaurs.
Why is it that birds persist all throughout here, but pterosaurs keep going extinct first? Why are they less able to fly above the floodwaters than the birds? Tell me, please.
Right. Now, to be fair, I have heard the argument that pterosaurs could not fly; they could only glide. I
That's
will
just
leave
not
that to
true.
you as a expert on this to
I can well,
to
first,
weigh in.
not exactly an expert, but I can promise you that is false. Pterosaurs
That's
were, if anything, better flyers than similarly sized birds.
man, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So, all right. At this point, I think we get to the point where so you're working on your own version of creationism, and you
Yes,
just can't get it to work.
I can't.
So eventually, I presume that means that leads you to the conclusion. Well, there isn't a way to make it work.
Yeah, I think the breaking point for me was the first semester at university at an actual college.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it was compounded because at the same time as I was, learning more and understanding more and building a stronger understanding of science and empirical methods in general,
Right.
this was the same time where I was kind of getting deeper into the iceberg of creationism and coming across some of the most insane explanations and theories. This was when I came across an ICR article explaining that plate tectonics don't exist.
Oof.
um
Rough.
right, this was the time where I came across Nathaniel Jeanson and his alternative history of the human race, right, which has some really bonkers claims. Like, did you know that around AD 180, uh, Middle Easterners sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and conquered the Mayans before becoming the North American natives?
But no, I did not know that. There's a
But
good reason I didn't
but
know that. It's because no
now you
one knows
know.
that, because that's not true.
Now you know. Um,
Yikes.
yes. So this was what I was coming across, and the problem is these explanations aren't just kooks being kooks, right? It's not people being crazy or conspiracy theories. This is like where you have to go eventually,
Hmm.
right? Because as you try to hold on to your own creationism, you get boxed in and boxed in and boxed in, um, until you have to come to this point where you write an alternative human history. Um,
That is off the wall crazy.
that is off the wall crazy. And so I was at this point where I really couldn't find any way to fit the science and knowledge that I did have with the with creationism that I espoused. Uh, but the problem that now presented itself was I was religious. I was a Christian. I believed in this, right? Um, yeah. So how did I get past that? It was a hard period, right? Because I'm sure you've heard of Ken Ham, his claim that Genesis is the foundation of the Bible, right?
Yes.
You stop believing in Genesis, you stop believing in the Bible. And while I don't totally agree with him on, the impact of Genesis on your faith as a whole, I do, see some of where he's coming from, right? Because, it starts out, you can say, well, Genesis 1 is, it's very heavily allegorical, right? It's elevated poetry. But then you're going to get to Genesis 2, then you can get to the flood story, then you get to the Tower of Babel, which are not really, they don't fit the same rhythm, the same um paradigm as Genesis 1 does. But then if you're going to go that far, right? And because there's no point in rejecting, rejecting creation if you accept a global flood, right? Like creation is the one that I have a lot less of a problem with, right?
Hmm.
Scientifically speaking, at least, it's a lot more palatable than a global flood 4,200 years ago. Um, and then you're going to move on past Genesis, right, into Exodus. If you're going to reject all of those stories and accounts, that contradict, geology, archaeology, as far as the flood in the Tower of Babel, well, the Exodus story doesn't have much, archaeological founding either, right? Like in that in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, up through Joshua, they conquered 35 Canaanite cities, but we've only found one of those cities, right? At least as far as in the archaeological record of the area. Similarly, with the Hebrews leaving Egypt, there's very sparse evidence that that ever happened, as well as we have very strong, at least I'm not going to say strong like they're unrefutable, but strong as far as ancient records go. The Egyptian records, Egyptian historical and genealogical records are very strong,
Hmm.
and they go back further than the flood.
Yeah.
So, you know, now you're up through Exodus, Joshua, Judges, and you're still, you haven't seen a single miracle. You're not ascribing to any of this as real. You're, believing that this is a creation myth that is to show the nature of Yahweh, to show the nature of the Hebrew God. And then you're at the historical books in the Old Testament. And yeah, I mean, at this point, if you're not going to accept anything before this as historical, what precedent do you have to accept these books as historical? Even if, mostly they live in a gray area of history where we couldn't really necessarily disprove that Solomon was the richest person to ever live. Um, Even if it is partially unlikely, right? And really you can go through this and then you get to the prophecy books like Daniel, which is, a book that started this whole process for me, where I'm not sure that I can figure out what these prophecies are referring to.
Right.
And the at least the literal interpretations don't seem very sound. So, you know, at this point you've got through the whole Old Testament up through the minor prophets up to the New Testament. And this doesn't necessarily alleviate your problem, right? Because the New Testament refers to, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a real person at a real time, right? These are real people, these are real events, right? And the Gospels say that Jesus came to fulfill the law, not destroy it, which, if you look at some of the problematic aspects of the Old Testament law, you might not be comfortable with. So, so this area is probably something that I'm having a hard time to, I guess, come to terms with, is finding a way to mesh a literal interpretation of scripture and creation, or not creation, but and being a Christian with also leaving your creationism.
Okay. So when you did leave Young Earth Creationism, did this cause any problems for any of your previous relationships with friends or family?
It did cause friction with friends. I've mostly kept like this process you know more private from family, just because you know it would cause a deeper rift there. And
Do they know now?
yeah, they do not know yet, so
Okay. Well, don't point them at this channel then.
I will not. I do not
Um,
intend to.
do you? Yeah. So that's probably likely to cause a problem then if that is a thing that comes out. So you're sort of still, I suppose, in the closet about that, at least somewhat.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, then you know what? Thank you for coming on because that takes some bravery. Because I mean, there's nothing that prevents them from finding this, right?
Right.
They're just unlikely to look for it. But like, who knows? Well, I'm sorry to hear that. That's not the first time I've heard that. That is pretty rough. Are you currently in a situation where you have like friends and whatnot who don't have to keep this from?
Um, yeah, I have a good circle of friends who are, religious, but also are accepting of,
Okay.
different more different viewpoints within the religion, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good because I do worry about things like that because it can be tough. And one of the messages I want to get across out there is like there after you leave Young Earth Creationism, that isn't the end of your life. There's
Right.
and even if it does cause the breakdown of some of your relationships, it's not going to be all of them. And even if it is a lot of them, you can like look like there's a whole community right here on this page right now with 48 people viewing. We had 50 something at one point. um like you can reach out. So what do you feel about the organizations, I guess especially AIG, since they were one of the big ones that you were influenced by, now that you're kind of completely out from under that idea?
Right. I have to be honest, Answers in Genesis is my least favorite of the creationist organizations, for a
Okay.
variety of reasons. I'm sure you've
Oh,
I know that you've run into some of those reasons with copyrights and stuff.
oh yes. Yeah, there's a
Yes.
reason why on my Tuesday streams, which are traditionally streams during which I'll drink as a bit of a drinking game. One of the options for a drinking trigger is if you can super chat something to the effect that AIG or a bunch of dicks, we'll take a drink.
Right. Which is a warranted drink. Yeah. I think part of my issue with Answers in Genesis is that they consistently not only present themselves as having the truth, right? They tie their arguments to spiritual authority and spiritual truth. And not only do they present their arguments that way, they sell their arguments that way to the tune of $17 million end of year fundraisers, right? Um, and I don't think that it's totally honest. Well, I don't think it's honest at all to do that, honest, right? Um,
Yeah,
if you're
very
going
much.
to if you're going to say something from a place of authority, you have a responsibility to be fair and to be right. If you sell it from a place of authority, that responsibility multiplies tenfold. And
Hmm.
I don't think that Answers in Genesis is, at all ethically responsible with their content, um, because they will present the whole gambit from very ignorant arguments to outright lies. They will present the whole gambit as the true universal truth, and they
Right.
are selling it as that. And it's just not always as cut and dry as they make. Well, it never is as cut and dry as they make it.
Yeah, actually, it's the lies that really get me the most. Especially when I know, because usually I can attribute most things to like, well, maybe there's ignorance or a misunderstanding or something. But with some of the AIG people, it's like, no, I can demonstrate that you know better. Like, hey, Andrew Snelling, why'd you put that person in this picture? Oh, is it because if they weren't there, it would show you that you're lying? Yeah. So that is one of the things. Although I will say this, unlike creation science evangelism, AIG is not currently being led by a convicted spouse abuser. So, there's that.
That is a fair point. Sorry,
It's a
just had a
low bar, but
just had a quick webcam troubles. But
no, don't
yes,
worry.
that is a fair point. It could be worse. Although I personally was not ever involved um, with Kent Hovind or his
Yeah,
organization, at least growing up. So maybe I don't have as
good.
much connection to them, uh, except watching here on YouTube. And I've had a like part of it is with Kent Hovind stuff. It is so low quality as far as his actual
Hmm.
arguments. You know, most of creationists, to their credit, have moved on from those arguments. 40 years ago, um, and yet it's also still important for these people like you to put a spotlight on him and to spend your Tuesdays
He
uh
has a big audience.
putting yourself through it. Yeah, because he does have an audience, and if nobody was doing it, then it wouldn't be getting countered, even if it's not really worth it. Some aspect.
It's certainly not worth it for any professional scientists, but that's not me.
True.
So that's one of the reasons why I take it upon myself is because it's like the people who are doing the real science, they don't have time for this. They've got real science to do. I don't. I'm available to spend a day every week looking at the worst of creationist output. But
Yeah.
we're gonna jump into the Q&A here in a bit. First, I'm gonna read out a couple super chats that aren't questions. But so here's how the Q&A runs. We're gonna run for about a half hour. If you have a question and you don't want to super chat it, make sure you tag me. So tag at Dapper Dinosaur so that I notice it, because otherwise there's a fair chance it'll just get lost in the sea of text. Um, if you do have a super chat, that will jump to the front of the queue, and we will go either until it looks like we just don't have very many questions left, or about a half an hour, whichever of those happens first. So first, a couple of super chats that are not questions. EMP says for £5, something to help you stay informing us. Also, congrats to Andrew on leaving creationism. Thank you very much, EMP.
Thank you.
We have from Caleb Dark, who's been a channel member at the Amniote level for 13 months.
Wow.
Hurrah, I managed to catch a live stream for a change with a top hat emoji. Thank you very much, Caleb Dark. It's always great to have you here, and I mean, I try to have different time streams, but like, it's not always easy. I get it. And here is our first super chatted question for $5 from Vandalia1998. What is the coolest thing you have learned since leaving the YEC camp?
Well, that's a good question. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of things in young Earth creationism, they just don't get mentioned or talked about, and then you go on to discover them later.
Mhm.
And I think there's a similar story where very cool things get swept under the rug or get rejected because it gives creationists an easy argument.
Yeah.
For example, uh, the Oort cloud, right? This cloud of debris that's hypothetical, that's not proven, out, far distant from our solar system. That is the origin of long series comets, right? There's not necessarily any reason for creationists to come against this hypothesis so much, except that it gives them a talking point. It's the same with feathers on dinosaurs. There's no reason that God couldn't have created, dinosaur kind to have feathers.
Yeah, creationists love to
But
die on that hill. It's such a silly hill to die
right,
on.
it gives them a talking point as another way to say, well, you creationists are wrong. It was the same with starlight, even though, or with star formation rather. Which when I was growing up, star formation was something that I didn't believe could happen. But Answers in Genesis has reversed their position on that, like in the last 5 years, right? So, you know, I think a lot of what I've learned is, uh, once I expanded my horizons outside young Earth creationism, I realized there was a very large amount of information, a large body of scientific knowledge that is very cool, and you can learn a lot without, first filtering it through a worldview.
All right. Well, let's see. Our next question comes from Unintrigued Feline, who asks, I am curious to his view on hominid evolution and how he had seen that throughout.
Right. Um, so hominin evolution is something that growing up, that was what was inked out of my books, right? And that was a very taboo subject. So that was probably something that I was more reluctant to look at and to get into, as I was questioning young Earth creationism, in late high school, after high school. Um, I actually am talking to Erica to Guts It Gibbon
Oh,
about doing an
cool.
interview with her on that, so she can educate me on some of that stuff. So we'll see if that happens. I hope it does.
Well, that would be
Um,
who I would recommend to you for that kind of a talk.
yeah, she's awesome.
Erica is great. In fact, actually, if you guys want to see Erica and maybe me, although this week it's a little bit less sure, check out Cheshire Vic's channel where we will be doing Dungeons and Dragons together, because she and I do Dungeons and Dragons every other week.
Very cool. I am very jealous. Um, yes. So as far as my view on hominid evolution, um, I mean, the fossils don't lie, right? You can say whatever you want about them, but there are still these bones in the ground,
Right.
right? Uh, um, yeah, there's still a bone from Australo Australopithecus. I cannot pronounce it.
Australopithecus.
Australopithecus afarensis, right? That is a bowl-shaped hip, right? With these flanges that extend upwards. There are still these spines that are S-shaped instead of C-shaped. There are still these huge brain cases relative to body size, right?
Hmm.
And I think that, it would be hypocritical of me to say that there is strong evidence for any other kind of evolution in the fossil record when we have much stronger evidence for hominin evolution than really any of these.
Right.
How that fits into my Christian worldview, that I'll have to be honest, I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's still something that I'm learning about. Like I said, I got started on that late, and I'm not actually sure that I will find a satisfactory way to mesh those two worldviews, but I hope I do.
The newest take I heard on that was that Adam and Eve were Homo erectus, and I was just like,
Right. I've seen
okay.
I've seen that they were Neanderthals. Now Homo erectus. That's going back even farther. Interesting.
Yeah. I've also there's a Dr. John Swamidas who has a concept called genealogical Adam and Eve, where Adam and Eve are not the first humans to exist, but they are the ones with whom God establishes some special relationship, and then they are also together common ancestors of all extant humans. Look, I'm not endorsing any of these, right? I don't.
Right.
This channel is religiously neutral. It doesn't have a dog in any of these fights.
Yeah.
But like there are proposed options that do not necessarily deny science, which is nice. So this is not technically a question, but I'm going to read it off anyway. Erichamian, which I think is how that's pronounced. If it's not, please let me know. Says, is this a fair paraphrase of that first question that you answered? The coolest thing I learned is that there's so much to learn.
It is a fair paraphrase, but I'm going to be a little bit more specific and say something really cool that I learned recently is the mammalian ear evolution.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yes, which is very cool. So you can see from starting with theropod dinosaurs with your synapsids, going up through reptiles and then into
Well, those wouldn't be theropods. That would be things like synapsids.
Right. Okay. Good to know. I am still learning this area. I apologize for my shortcoming.
No worries.
But yeah, moving up into the early mammals, you can see this very smooth, honestly, very smooth transition where the angular and parts of the jaw reduce and move backward before detaching and becoming the components of the inner ear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting to me because if you try to approach this from a place of created kind, you have to ask, is this a jawbone or is this an ear bone, right? Because you
Right.
have this solidly fused piece of jaw in your synapsids, right? And that same bone can be observed through these generations, shaping into a part of the inner ear. And that's a really cool process that I wouldn't have really been able to study or consider if it weren't for, maybe moving away from your with creationism.
Yeah, and that's another one of those things that creationists really don't like to talk about. They do not like to talk about the synapsid evolution into mammals because, I mean, it's really hard to just hand wave it away and say, well, God just made them that way. It's like, I'm sorry, God just made them with double jaw joints for what reason? What's the reason for this? And there's just, he wanted to. Which it's like, okay, but you don't see how that's like super post hoc and not very compelling.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, that is one of my favorite bits is the reptile mammal. Well, colloquially speaking, the reptile mammal transition.
Sure.
Technically, no, there are no reptiles involved in this transition, but you know what? In honor of RJ Downard, who's a friend of the channel and who has a book with that subtitle, we'll call it the reptile mammal transition. Which, by the way, I own that book, but when I met him, I forgot to bring it to have it signed. Instead, I only had him sign The Rocks Were There, Volume 1, which he is also he's a co-author on. So, yeah, he and I and a number of other people took a trip to the Grand Canyon. So we had a little,
very cool.
Yeah, it was a little like YouTube community trip up to the Grand Canyon. So, but that's not what we're here for. So let's see. Do I have any other questions? I don't see any currently. So now, are you still pursuing a biology degree?
I am. I'm a biology major, second year of college, so I'm about halfway there.
And that's for your
Still
undergrad?
a layman, though. Yes.
Okay.
My undergrad.
What do you focus
and
on
I'm
in your
also-
studies?
Microbiology. I
Okay.
really like the tiny stuff.
Explains why the big vertebrates you're a little a little on the shaky side there.
Yes. I am going to brush up on that.
Hey, you know what? I'm not very good when it comes to things that are microscopic.
Fair enough.
So, well, that's pretty cool. Like, what do you have a career goal for when you're done with all your school, or?
I like lab work a lot. So probably something like that. Maybe a contract lab. Have all the
Okay.
big companies send us their cultures to test.
So, do you think at some point it's going to become impossible for you to continue to keep it from your family that you're no longer a young Earth creationist? Because it seems like if you keep pursuing a biology degree, eventually it'll become hard to like keep doing that while still pretending
to live a double life. So.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is a period of contention for me, I guess. That's a place where I'm not really sure where things are going to go. But I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there, huh?
Yeah. I mean, good luck. I do know some people who've had it go either way, where their parents were just like, well, it's not what we would have chosen, but it's not gonna like tear the family apart. But I've also known people who were more or less shunned. So I hope very much. Now, to be fair, more people I know in the first camp than the second camp.
Right.
So I do hope that that is how that goes. But like I said, look, there's a lot of people who've gone through what you have. I have a whole show about it. I don't even remember what episode this is, but been a fair few. And so
Seems pretty up there.
yeah, so please, if you do need to, make sure you reach out, because there's people who can help out. In fact, that's actually one of the big points I have whenever Jackson Wheat and I talk to creationists. I'm the one who's like, hey, here's some options for support if you're feeling ugh. The Sisyphean Beat asks a question, and this is one of the questions that you don't have to answer because this is not the focus of the show, but you may. The Sisyphean Beat asks, are you still a Christian?
Yes, I am still a Christian. This has been mainly to do with, I mean, it would be incomplete to say that this transition away from young Earth creationism has come with, or has not been accompanied by questions about Christianity in general.
Mhm.
I've mentioned a couple of times prophecy, even though that's more my denomination specific. But there's also things to do with the Old Testament law that I find uh,
Yeah.
very objectionable. I'll just say that, right? And even into the New Testament, I don't know that some of those things about the treatment of women, the treatment of children, the treatment of enemies after war, the treatment of slaves. I don't think that the New Testament did a lot to correct or to recover those, which obviously I would have preferred if it did. So that's an
Yeah.
area that I don't know about, right? I just honestly don't know.
Okay. I think that's a perfectly fair place to be. I'm much happier for people to say that they don't know about something than to have a false sense of bravado and just declare that they know something when they don't.
Yes, I agree on.
An intrigued feline asks, are you now more wondrous about nature given the fact that all the flora and fauna are essentially, quote, randomly generated over millions of years?
There there is a lot of breathing room for wonder when you can approach science as a thing unto itself rather than an you know ideological tool, a rhetorical tool to use. Um, and yeah, when you insert all those thousands of years of space and those physical processes and those chemical processes and those biological processes that have led us to where we are today, there's a lot of really cool stuff that I am starting to learn and starting to appreciate in a way that I had not before. So
Mhm.
yeah, I would definitely say that the answer there is yes. You know, when you look at things like symbiotic relationships and how they formed, it's really cool. It's
Oh,
really
yeah.
awesome. Um, and there's a lot of stuff, with young Earth creationism. One of the things is, very often they'll play dumb and say, "Oh, we don't know, or we can't know, or the rocks won't say for sure, or there's different interpretations," right? But when you actually try to actually look for for further knowledge, for more knowledge, you can find some really cool stuff. For example, the correlation between ice cores and this isn't exactly biology related like your question, but the correlation between ice cores and the lactites in caves, stalactites and stalagmites.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It's really cool. You can see a correlation between not only the O14, the oxygen 14 levels, but also, or is it's O18, sorry. But also things like the amount of pollen in them, the amount of detritus and organic material in lake farms, and all of these different processes that are totally unrelated and in different places across the globe. Like you'll have a cave in Brazil and an ice core in Greenland, a lake in Spain, and all of these all of these different ideas. You can make a graph of climate going back tens of thousands of years, and they all agree, which is so cool to me. That's what I
Yeah.
love about science.
And there's no expectation that they should under young Earth creationism.
Right.
Yeah.
There's not only that, but there's no reason to look into these or to research these from a creationist perspective, right? It's just ice cores, it's just like Favre's, it's just tree rings, whatever it is. There's no reason to try to correlate, paleoclimates based on these, but you can do that. And the fact that they
Mhm.
agree so specifically is awesome to me.
Yeah, that actually brings up something that I find a lot with young Earth creationism, whereas now you'll see young Earth creationists saying things like, oh, well, we would predict, a nested hierarchy within kinds, and that there'd even be a broader nested hierarchy, or all these things that, like, I'm sorry, no, you wouldn't, because you spent
Right.
decades saying that we would never find these things, and now that it's
Right.
so obvious we have, you're like, oh, well, we thought that would be the case all along, and I'm just like, excuse me, I have, creationist publications going back decades that disagree with you strongly. Like, I'm sorry, you're not going to just gaslight everyone into thinking that this was always your position.
Well, yeah, I mentioned that earlier with star formation, right? It was the position when I was growing up. I was taught that new stars never form, um, and then obviously that position has been reversed because at this point we've observed every step along the proverbial conveyor belt or the
Right.
production line, the assembly line, right? And we've seen every process that leads to star formation to the point where it's pretty sure that that's what happens, right? We have a pretty good idea of the life cycle of stars. You know, and so it's really interesting to see how, um creationism lags behind conventional science because they will not accept anything until they can fit it into their worldview.
Yeah. All right. Well, I am not seeing too many more questions. I think we got through the questions. So a little light on questions today, but that's okay because we had a really good discussion. So unless I find any more last-second questions, I'm going to ask if there's anything that you would like to say to help wrap us up, and then I will give some channel news, and we're going to get out of here.
I think that's good. I had a great time here.
Well, awesome. Is there any place that people can find you if they want to follow you?
Brewing conclusions on YouTube. I have not posted much, but I'm working on it.
Okay. When you do first post some stuff, let me know, and I will make sure to add links to that. So if you're watching this in the far future, I don't know, maybe it's like 3232 and this is somehow still around. There will be links to the now long gone Drawing Conclusions channel.
Yeah.
So let's see. As far as channel stuff coming up, I need to pull up a calendar. So let's see. So Tuesday should be a Jackson with Jackson. It would normally have been a Matt with Maddie, but Maddie is very busy with her. She's doing finals, and there's also some other stuff that's coming up for her, so that is not going to be an option for her. And then the following Tuesday will be another Jackson with Jackson, which will be our regularly scheduled. The 29th is planning to be a Kent with Bent. Let's see. The 17th, Thursday, this Thursday, part 4 of Busting Dismantled should be out on my channel. If you have not seen the previous episodes, episode 1 was over on Guts at Gibbons' channel, episode 2 was on my channel, episode 3 was on Dr. Dan Sturton Cardinal's channel, Creation Myths. Then, let's see, Saturday, I don't know, maybe we'll do more Giants of North America. But that's still a little bit up in the air. I don't know if anything's happening the 26th. The 24th should be the start of a new series, Kurt Unwise, which is just a short 2-part series about Kurt Wise, in case that wasn't obvious. If for some reason that doesn't happen, it might be in one of my supercuts, but I don't think it will be. I think it'll just be Kurt, the first part of that Kurt Wise 2-parter. As a reminder, guys, the Patreon drive is still going. I am hoping to hit the 400 per month. I'm currently at $292, so it's $108. Like I said, it starts at only $1 a month. You can do a yearly subscription for a single payment with a 10% discount on the monthly price. It does give you access to a exclusive patron and channel member only Discord server. It gives you access to all my videos early. It gives you, at different levels, you'll be included in various like the credits and whatnot. There's a level where I'll give the occasional Blender file in case you like my 3D models. You can just have them. If you go really high, you can just say, hey, I need you to make a video about this, and as long as it's reasonable for the channel, I'll do it. So yeah, there's a lot of options, and plus it'll help support the channel because it takes a lot of time and effort to do this, and yeah, I want to keep doing it, so please do consider that. And I think that's basically it. We're gonna get out of here and play the end credits. So, Drew, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we are out of here. For Bob Knob, Ben Tovand, Denny5252, Ian Chen, John Ackerman, Chris Love, Landon Knoll, Sphincter of Doom, and Patrick Dennis. Without the help of the people whose name you see on screen right now, this channel simply wouldn't exist. If you'd like to join the team, there's links in the description to my Patreon, as well as a join button right below this video that will allow you to join on YouTube. Joining gets you access to an exclusive Discord server, early access to my videos, often more than a month in advance, as well as other perks depending on how much you decide to pledge. However, if a monthly or annual pledge isn't for you, there are other ways to support the channel, including a merch store down in the description, and hey, just liking and sharing this video always helps a lot. Thank you very much. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.